Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Thinking Differently, the Opportunity from Diversity webinar. My name is Lee Hutchison, and I'm an employment advisor from Into Work here in Edinburgh and the co-chair of Skills Development Scotland's Neurodiversity in Tech workstream. I'm delighted to be joined today by Aaron Linton-Smith, Katrina Stewart from Swan, and Megan Sanderson from Enable. Now, before we get underway, I'd like to highlight some housekeeping points to help the webinar run as smoothly as possible. Firstly, the session is being recorded today and the presentations will be available on YouTube in just a few days' time. All participants will be on mute on the duration of the webinar, but I do encourage you to please ask questions throughout. To do this, click on the questions in the control panel. Type in your question and press send, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can during the question and answer session. Your feedback and opinions are extremely important to us all, so we'll know each and every question. And if we don't have time to answer them all today, we will endeavour to incorporate them into future presentations in the series. There will be interactive polls displayed on your screen in between each of the segments today for about 30 seconds. So please answer them and we can display the results for everyone to see during the webinar. This will also help inform the direction and travel for consultation. Finally, we will be sharing videos. Finally, we will be sharing videos during today's webinar. If you're struggling to hear those, please check your audio options and settings on the computer and not your phone. If you have a monitor plugged into your laptop, you may have to disconnect the second screen in order to hear. So our first poll is up today, and on a scale of 1 to 5, how much knowledge do you have of neurodiversity? So we'll have this up for about 30 seconds. So if you can vote now, that would be fantastic. So there we go, some really interesting kind of answers there, and hopefully we can turn you into little experts by the end of today's session. So our first panelist is going to be Katrina from Swan, Scotland. So Dr. Stewart co-founded Swan, Scottish Women's Autism Network, in 2012. Swan facilitates peer-supported forums and groups and has delivered groundbreaking learning event conferences and offers training and professional support across employment and the public sector services. Scottish Government funded a Swan initiative to evidence the impact of peer mentoring for autistic women and girls, the Under Our Wing programme, and currently the Swan Employment Project, which gives coaching and mentoring to autistic women in work contexts while offering training to employers and colleagues. So Katrina, take it away.
Yay, we have the technology. Good morning, everyone. First of all, just like to say thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this event. I think it's absolutely brilliant that different areas of employment, different sectors are actually increasingly taking an interest in this topic. So I'm going to talk very briefly about why neurodiversity is important. First of all, I would just like to introduce myself. Yes, I'm a late diagnosed autistic woman. I'd actually already completed my PhD and had the summary of the findings of my PhD, which was on the experiences of girls with Asperger's syndrome and anxiety, published before I actually got my own diagnosis. In fact, I'd set up Swan, Scottish Women's Autism Network, before I got a diagnosis, and then I didn't disclose for a couple of years. But that's a longer story. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, as a late diagnosed woman who was in my 50s before I actually got a diagnosis, just want to mention very briefly what the benefits and downsides are of that. The benefits of not being diagnosed as autistic, I mean, you know, when I was young, it wasn't really something that was discussed at all, and it was definitely, it thought of at all. It was thought of as being, you know, a small boy rocking in the corner and very, very disabled. So obviously, someone like me was even going to be a thing. So the benefits of that are that actually I've done a lot of things in my life. not always wisely, and not always playing to my strengths, but I have had some great times. I've done some really interesting things because no one was able to tell me that I couldn't, and there was no internal voice telling me I couldn't. So, you know, I did all sorts of things. I did a bit of politics. I worked in the film industry for a few years. I had my family. I retrained, etc., etc., and then ended up being an academic researcher. The downsides are, and this is really, really important, really crucial, is if you don't know that you are autistic, then it's very hard to develop a sense of self and to understand your needs and to develop tools for self-care. So like a lot of other autistic people, I've crashed and burned a number of times throughout my life. I haven't always been able to play to my strengths. I've known that I've had ability, but I didn't realise how able I actually am until I realised that I was autistic, and I've been able to start playing to my strengths. So next slide, please. Could I have the next slide, please? Oh, thank you. So yes, SWAN, Scottish Women's Autism Network, we are a peer support organisation. We're primarily run by volunteers who run regional peer support meetup groups, and also we put all that online during COVID. We run online webinars as well for our community. But one of the things we've been doing is we've been funded by Scottish Government to run an employment project, and that launched early last year. Obviously, we had to pivot a bit and remodel it to deal with COVID. And I recruited 2 members of staff who I've never actually met in real life, but they're absolutely fantastic. So what we do is we support the autistic female employee with advice, coaching, mentoring. And our other part of what we do is we're there to support the employer and the management in an organisation to create a more inclusive workplace. So we've spent the last year and a bit, the project's actually been extended for another 6 months, working with a range of people across sectors. I mean, from retail to academia to local authorities to the prison service, to cinemas, you know, really very broad range. And we're learning a huge amount out of this work. Next slide, please. Okay, so, oh, can you, sorry, could you go back one? Sorry, that's my fault. So part of what we've been doing is we've been identifying the common themes that are emerging in relation to the autistic employees. And we're using those themes to actually build more online kind of training and so coaching kind of services, if you like, to autistic adult women. We're also identifying common concerns and barriers that are experienced by employers and management, and that's been really interesting too, because I think that's going to allow us to perhaps work more effectively, to focus on the things that really concern employers. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So why is neurodiversity important? It's important because at a workplace level, it's known generally throughout the whole workforce, not just autistic people, but in general terms, diversity in the workplace means that the workplace is happier, people are more happy, they're more productive, they're able to deliver their best selves at work. Which means that you have improved organisational outcomes, and in the corporate world, that means effectively a better bottom line. You know, you're more productive, you have better outcomes for the organisation, and that's true across sectors. Of course, on a human level, autistic people are often denied. Employment is a human right. It's recognised as a human right under the United Nations definition of universal human rights, and it's something that autistic people often struggle to access. So on a human level, you've got workers, you've got staff, you've got a workforce that are able to access the human rights in the context of employment, and improve mental health and well-being for the individual. And what that means at a social community level, of course, is you've got a more integrated and inclusive society. You're allowing autistic people to contribute to society more happily and more healthily and you know than sometimes is the case. And that inevitably is going to reduce demands on health and social services. So including autistic people in the workplace, it's a win-win for everybody, really. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to mention the issue of gender just very briefly. I think I'm about to run out of time, but it is important because I quite often talk about autistic girls and women as being a marginalised population within a marginalised population. Gender and autism stereotyping have kind of intersected to make it very difficult for autistic women to be identified first and foremost, and then actually to be able to access what they need. Now, one of the things that's worth saying is that a lot of autistic women and some autistic men too have described how, or do describe how they have difficulties really fitting in with this idea, the set idea of gender that they're supposed to we're supposed to meet. So as you know, we're often tomboys as children. We often prefer male company, and we quite often do. Our interests are not always gender typical. So you may well get autistic women who would love to work in the construction industry and love to drive heavy equipment, and we do have people in our network who drive big lorries, for example. Or they may be the engineers, they may be the chemists, they may be maybe interested in things that is not gender typical, and that's really important to keep in mind, that if you stick with the kind of stereotype picture of what women and men are able to do, then you're losing a whole pool of talent there. So I think that's probably it. I can't remember. Do I have another slide? Do I have another? Yes, and Lynn and Lindsay are the staff members who've been rolling out the employment project. So and that's our funders down at the bottom there, Scottish Government and Scottish Autism. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for that. That was a really fascinating presentation. I'm going to be changing hats now, and I'm going to be giving a presentation on reasonable adjustments in the workplace. So I will be getting that up now. So I work for a charity here in Edinburgh called Into Work, and we have been around for 25 years supporting neurodivergent individuals, people with a range of disabilities and mental health conditions into employment. So as you can see from this is just the smallest example of the type of work that we have helped people get into, from things like support work to mail to working in HR to government and everything in between. So we have a broad range of experience, which also gives us a broad range of perspectives on people's experiences and adjustments that they require. So, just as always worth underlining, disability is recognised under the Equality Act, and employers have a duty to accommodate those with a disability. And what that is about is giving people a fair opportunity through adjustments, through whether that's the interview stage, applications, or in the workplace. And we're going to touch on what those adjustments might be. Some of these you might have heard of, some of these might be new to you. So a reasonable adjustment, oops, sorry. I accidentally knocked my screen off there. Apologies. Yes, so reasonable adjustments are changes to the interview process and the work environment that allow people to work safely and productively, as well as being given the same opportunities as non-disabled people. So here are some examples that we have from some of our clients that we've worked with over the years. So when it comes to an interview, for example, it can naturally be stressful for everyone, but for those that are neurodivergent, it brings an extra bit of stress and anxiety. And how can we give them a fair opportunity at the interview stage to present their best answers and to showcase that they might be the best individual for the thing? So it could be interview questions and structure ahead of time, which allows someone to think about the questions, to process it, and to bring their best answer on the day. That might mean that, yes, they have the questions ahead of time, but they will have time to think about their best answer, and they will be able to give that to you, as opposed to maybe giving it to someone on the day, and they might feel a bit stressed and anxious and not able to potentially articulate themselves as well as they could with a bit of time to process. Interview questions presented in a different format, for example, larger font on coloured paper or braille. I think we all take it for granted that maybe people can't always read the Times New Roman 12. Can we change interview sheets, documents to make sure that most people can read it and to access it. Extra time to read and complete a task. Maybe that's some extra time to process the questions, what's being asked, and it usually maybe just works at a couple of minutes extra per 15 minutes. So always helpful to give people as much breathing room as possible. And seeing the office environment before an interview, so that allows someone to turn up and to be able to see where they might be working, to process what they might be heading into. Is it going to be an environment that works for them? And for some people, an interview isn't the best place to showcase their skills and talents, and maybe it could be a traditional day in the office as opposed to kind of doing an interview. So them actually doing the job and so on, as opposed to a traditional interview. So maybe they get given a task for the day, watching how they work and interact with that, as opposed to maybe going through the traditional route. And follow-up questions or prompts for questions as well. You know, some people will be able to give some answers, but they'll be able to give you a bit more information if prompted. I think sometimes as panelists or when we're interviewing people, we can always just accept the answer that we're given. Whereas there's nothing wrong with being able to go, oh, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Can you expand upon that? And the names and photos of the interview panel as well. So it helps people maybe when they're going into that room, which can be intimidating, can be scary to see, who am I going to be speaking to? Who am I going to be talking to? I think those are always fantastic things for people to be able to see ahead of time. And questions based on actual experience as well. So sometimes questions can be a bit kind of cerebral, can it be a bit kind of maybe not applicable in terms of what they're thinking. Whereas if you talk about someone's actual experience, they'll be able to showcase what they've learned, what they can do, and what they can bring. And on to the next slide. And sorry, skip there, right one. And how can we help the neurodiverse in our workplace? So someone's been successful in achieving an interview. What can we do to make sure that the workplace is even better? So we think about the environment. Background noise can be overwhelming or make it difficult to concentrate. Is there a potential area of the office that someone feels more comfortable going to? Is there we often think about hot desking at the moment. Hot desking we found for neurodivergent individuals can sometimes be a bit of stress. Is there a potential desk that they can kind of sit at that makes them feel comfortable and feel at ease and feels like their own space? Breaking down complex tasks into smaller pieces. That's not to say the person can't do the task, but it's how do we make sure that the person can best understand the task and work through it. And visual instructions help. You know, some people have no problems at all with things being written down and being given to them, but for some people they need different ways of learning and processing information. So how can we deliver that information? And making clear, precise statements and straight to the point. Sometimes we can be quite colorful with our language. We might not always be as clear as we can be. So being direct with comments will make sure that someone is understanding what's expected of them. And much as I've kind of mentioned before, giving people time to process information. Sometimes it might take someone just a few minutes to take on board what's just been said. That's really helpful for some people. And repeating the instructions as well. So it might be helpful as well to just kind of reiterate something that you've maybe just said and go through it and break down. And we all know what it can be like in the office as well, kind of office place banter, sarcasm. You know, some people will maybe get it, some people won't. So it's sometimes best thinking about who's your audience. You know, can something be explained? Can, workplace banter and communication be made more inclusive? And communicate changes to the job role with as much notice as possible. Easier said than done in our current climate where things have changed so quickly, but if someone is going to have any changes to their job or there's going to be any changes in the work environment, make sure to give someone as much time as possible as once again to give them time to process information. And I think, a key takeaway I think you'll hear from all of us today is every person that's neurodiverse, everyone that has a health condition, all has their own way of learning, speaking and understanding. Ask someone what works for them. Some of these examples today are all examples from clients that we've worked with, but they don't apply to, not all of them apply to every single person, but some of them do. So find out what works best for that person to help support them in the work environment. And putting reasonable adjustments into place. So here's a couple of examples of some that have been put into place for some of the people we've worked with. Letting someone use earphones or noise cancelling earplugs to reduce the level of noise within the office. Yes, you maybe take them out when you're getting given instructions or maybe working in a team, but if they're working at a computer, working on a project, and that can help them focus, that is only a positive thing. A quiet place within or outside the office for someone to go if they feel overwhelmed or anxious. Breaks away from the screen. I'm sure we're all feeling that just now with Zoom fatigue, etc. But making sure people are taking time away from their screen. having a point of contact, a work buddy to approach, for example. So if someone's maybe struggling in work and the boss isn't always available, or the line manager, who's that person that maybe sits next to them or around them or on their team that can contribute and be a positive influence? You know, regular meetings as well with a manager or work buddy. These things can be really important for kind of reviewing how things are going. If there are any challenges in the workplace for the employee or the manager, having a safe and positive place as well for people to discuss things as well is always positive. Staff bios, including their photos, it might help someone to approach them, have ideas of conversation starters as well, and to put up systems in place, for example, to help with things such as a color-coded system about, okay, that's done, maybe I can do this next. So these are just a small kind of dip in the ocean of some reasonable adjustments that we've had from our neurodivergent clients. And one of the things that is often a bit of a myth as well, that it costs money to take on someone with a disability or health condition, or I don't think my employer could afford to take someone on that has a health condition and requires some adjustments or new technology, whether it's a different screen or software, etc. That shouldn't be the case. Access to work is frustratingly described as one of the government's best kept secrets. It's a pot of money that goes towards the employer to be able to put things into place for a client coming in. So it could be new tables, chairs, you know, in-work support. You know, it can be a wide range of things. You know, these examples here are only, again, a dip in the ocean of what's out there, but it helps pay for this kind of service, which is fantastic. So you can hire the best employee without having in the back of your mind that you might need to adjust your budgets or anything else like that. And you can obviously learn more about what we can do from Skills Development Scotland. So Skills Development Scotland have a neurodivergent and digital technology report, which highlights that employers are missing out on a massive talent pool with proven skills that can improve productivity, creativity, and innovation in the workplace. And the report recommends, you know, a range of actions to make it more inclusive. So from changes to, you know, job recruitment, to induction processes, to the workplace, and how that can be done. And we are bringing together as a work stream how to carry that out, and more resources and case studies will be available to all businesses, big and small, in Scotland. So we will be looking to roll that out, and that report will be sent to you at the end of this presentation. So thank you very much to everyone for listening to me there. We're now going to hear from Megan from Enable. Sorry, 2 seconds. Yeah, we're now going to hear from Megan from Enable, who's going to be talking about implementing inclusive practices. So Megan is a fantastic disability and inclusion specialist with Enable Works, the employment arm of Enable Scotland, working nationally with employers to create more inclusive working practices. Megan has a background in support employment, supporting disabled and neurodivergent individuals to gain and sustain employment opportunities, along with leading a team working in these roles. So I'll hand you over now to Megan Sanderson.
Great, thanks very much, Lee. I'm just going to get my screen up here so you can hopefully all see this. Okay, hopefully that's there and okay for everybody. So yeah, thanks very much, Lee, for handing that over to me. So I'm Megan from Enable Works, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit today about some of the work Enable Works is doing at the moment around how we're kind of helping employers to implement inclusive practices. So just to give you a little bit of background, Enable Works is the employability arm of our wider organisation, Enable Scotland, and we believe that every person should have the opportunity and has a right to work. So we aim to do this really by supporting disabled and neurodivergent people nationally with sort of gaining and sustaining that employment. And we're working with people in such a range of circumstances, a range of age groups as well. So people who are just leaving school and need support for that transition, through to any working age as well, so people who might have had a change of circumstances later in life or just need a change of career. So really kind of vast career roles, different sectors, as has kind of been expressed previously as well. And in tandem with that, we also support employers all over Scotland to feel confident in hiring and supporting disabled and neurodivergent employees. And really the aim there is to help employers to create overall an inclusive workplace, and to really sort of understand and see the benefits of that, of having kind of different skill sets, different minds contributing and complementing one workforce for the better. So how we've done that previously, how we've tried to work with employers and kind of help them be inclusive, has been through that kind of person-centred approach, based on the needs and aspirations of each individual we're supporting. So our services within Enable Works, the kind of services we support people on are all across Scotland through to the east, west, up to the Highlands even now. So, you know, when we're supporting an individual, we would approach an employer based on that person's aspirations and really try to make sure that the job role was inclusive for their individual needs. And obviously the kind of the hope and the advice here you know, would knock on to that employer's kind of wider team and wider way of working. But we also acknowledge that we would need to have a more sort of strategic approach across organisations as well, and really kind of look, you know, give a kind of bit of a bird's eye view, look sort of head on to an employer and see and analyse really everything that employer's doing and how inclusive it is across all parts of their organisation, which would hopefully give them the kind of resources and tools to be able to support any individual going forward who might be disabled or neurodivergent, and crucially give them the tools to sort of adapt that for each individual who comes through the door, because again, the same kind of message I'm echoing here is that we can talk about ways to be inclusive and reasonable adjustments for people in the workplace, but each person's the expert in terms of what they need and how they should be supported. So it's just another reminder of that. So really we would work with employers, you know, anybody we're working with, to try and establish a bit of a baseline understanding and really kind of help you see what your workplace is like all round to start with, so that we can see kind of areas that you're doing really well, areas that you're doing really great with, and maybe areas that we could work on together to sort of build a bit more inclusion in there and be more accessible for a diverse range of talent coming through. So we'd look at your workplace culture. You know, that might be thinking about how is kind of disability and neurodivergence seen across your organisation. So what's the kind of buy-in for diversity across your organisation as well? Have you got really everybody on board and sort of understanding the real benefits that diversity brings to everybody? So that kind of extends through to your HR teams, your recruitment teams, your various tiers of management, but also just within colleagues who are working there on the front line as well. So really trying to understand and grasp sort of what does everybody think about disability and neurodivergence, and what's the kind of attitudes there, and you know, is there anything there we can kind of work on to improve that. We would also help you think about how you would attract talent into your organisation. So even before that point of thinking about interviews and advertising jobs, what's your organisation really saying about itself in terms of being inclusive and in terms of wanting to attract a diverse range of people? So, for example, is your website accessible? You know, potential candidates might go there before they think about applying for a job with you. So if your website is friendly to screen readers, for example, which some neurodivergent individuals might rely on and need, then that's, you know, that's a kind of first sign to show that you're inclusive and kind of understand those needs. Also kind of what are you saying in terms of trying to recruit people into your organisation? Do you really put out a diversity message, and do you put out the fact that you want to attract neurodivergent individuals, because that's an instant or signal to people that you want that kind of skill set, you want kind of different minds within your organisation. And then you can think about the job specs of your actual job adverts themselves. So, you know, we can help you think about the wording you use there within your job advertisements. So, you know, really trying to critique your practice there and think about, is those essential skills I put there actually essential? So we might kind of be in the habit or be used to sort of reusing job adverts, and there might be some sort of essential points there which could be potentially off-putting for some people if it's not really needed for the role. So we might think, could you just take that out if it's not exactly needed? So, you know, for example, if you've got there that you have to be an excellent communicator, sort of very, very confident publicly speaking at lots of different levels, that's potentially a big area that would put some people off if it's not really key to the role. So it's just helping you kind of understand really what you really need in there, so that you're not accidentally excluding some people from those roles. And then we move on to the area around accessible interviews. So that might be the sort of traditional competency-based question and answer interview that we all are probably familiar with and know well. And the interview point is often a point that a lot of our clients who we support have real barriers with and real difficulties getting through. So it's really about trying to think about, you know, how clear are your interview questions, how concise are they covering, is it actually a question that's got 3 parts to it, or is it just one message in that question? Because that can potentially be quite difficult to understand what you're asking there for some people, particularly for some neurodivergent people as well. So again, it's really helping you to make sure that your questions are to the point and concise and clearly understood as well, without any sort of ambiguity. And so I'll just touch on in a little minute about kind of alternatives to that altogether, which might be more appropriate for the individual, but also for yourself. Then we'll look about thinking about inclusive onboarding. So, you know, what are your kind of policies and processes like once you've actually hired somebody and you're trying to help them start the role and be included in the workplace there? What reasonable adjustments are you supporting that person to put in place? And then we kind of move on to the retaining talent and developing people side of thinking about your organisation. So, you know, what support measures have you got in place to make sure that people will stay with you long term and progress and kind of develop throughout their careers with you as well? And it's also acknowledging the fact that, you know, how kind of inclusive is your workplace for your current workforce as well, just in case you do have people who may have not disclosed a disability or disclosed neurodivergence to you, if they maybe don't feel confident or if they maybe faced stigma previously. So really thinking about your current workforce and what you can do to make sure you really understand the needs of people who are there with you already. So just a wee example to touch on across all those areas is around this idea of rethinking recruitment, really. So I've mentioned about the way that we can think about and sort of scrutinise really the questions we ask in interviews, but also consider what alternatives might be appropriate for people as well. So, you know, we can think about a work trial, for example, in place of that traditional competency-based interview, if appropriate for the job. So a work trial is a really good way to demonstrate help a candidate demonstrate their practical ability and really show you their strengths in that position, which might be actually a better way for you to judge that and for you to see that, as opposed to that sort of question and answer setup that we're all familiar with. So that can remove a lot of the stress and anticipation around answering questions for some neurodivergent people, and give a different way to really show their skill set. You might think about a task. So again, it could be inviting somebody in for an interview, but it's carrying out a short task or a short practical activity in place of that. And again, it's just an alternative way to be able to show and demonstrate skill sets. You might think about something we're all probably very familiar with now as well. So one small silver lining of having to work like this through COVID is offering remote interviews where applicable and where a candidate may ask for this. Again, it might just remove any sort of additional stress factors that might apply to somebody coming into your office or coming into your base. So it removes that uncertainty of what is your environment like, is there kind of sensory overloads happening in your office if there's kind of bright lighting or kind of a lot of people moving around and things like that. So it might just help alleviate some stress for somebody to carry out their interview in a kind of familiar and comfortable surrounding. I'm sure we can all kind of relate to, you know, potentially that stress of trying to find a location and try to find the right person and make sure that you're in the right place. So for somebody who might become particularly overwhelmed in that setup, it just eliminates all that pressure. And then you might think about a home task as well. So something which potentially somebody could work on in their own time at home with a bit of a deadline there. And again, it's just it's kind of catering for another group of people who might really benefit and thrive from showing you what their performance could be when given a little bit of extra time to process what's being asked of them. So again, that could be really helpful for some people, some neurodiverse people as well. And then we'll maybe help you think about supporting employees and the sort of adjustments you might put in place there. So I'll just touch on a couple of these because again, Lee just gave you some brilliant examples of the exact adjustments that you could help people with in work. But generally speaking, you could support people to remove elements of roles if there's maybe some areas that aren't quite playing to their strengths. And then, you know, to reciprocate that, you might sort of take parts of a role of somebody else. So we call this job carving in supported employment and when supporting people. And it can really just make sure that your staff and your team are kind of using their strengths to the best ability and doing the appropriate roles for them. Thinking about locations, so allowing separate spaces for somebody to work in where possible. You know, you might, like Lee mentioned with Hot Desk, and you might have a kind of set location for other people if appropriate. Providing alternative information formats, so making sure that that information you might be given in work, if it's induction materials or just kind of day-to-day work materials, just sort of altering that for a way that might be appropriate for someone who's neurodivergent. So, you know, kind of having large font or images which might go alongside a bit of information you're giving. And allowing that extra time to go through tasks or work through information, along with potentially thinking about assistive technology, could also be another adjustment or way to make sure people are fully supported. So that might be software or even apps which can assist with screen readers or sort of breaking text down, or even sort of assist with things like coping mechanisms if there's kind of stressful parts to the role as well. And then we sort of come on to sort of general support around you know, helping someone prioritise or timetable if that's an area of difficulty for that person. And then around your sort of working patterns, you know, what can you do to give that flexibility for people? And again, if you're advertising or kind of promoting yourself as a flexible employer, then that's a small sort of cue and signal to a diverse audience that you might be able to account their needs there, because some people really thrive and benefit from having a flexible work schedule, and others might actually, in contrast, benefit from a really fixed and kind of routine structure as well. And then you could also potentially think about your wider workforce and what training is in there to help your kind of team understand the importance of diversity and inclusion, and sort of make sure that culture is there so that everybody feels included going forward. And along with doing that, you know, we'll help you think about, you know, how do you get feedback to help your teams collaborate there. You know, how do you put that in place and make sure communication is accessible? Are you making sure that individuals have regular review opportunities and time to reflect on their practice, along with reflecting on how those reasonable adjustments might be working for them as well? And lastly, just think about, to help that person really expand and grow within your organisation, what measures can you put in place for their development? So, you know, do you have access to mentoring schemes in your organisation, or can you put that in place? And can you be flexible with offering kind of new experience opportunities? So might just be through something like shadowing, for example, or seeing other parts of the organisation. So really making sure that that person is included in the longer term, not just sort of once they're kind of in the door and in your organisation essentially. So that's just to kind of give you a bit of an understanding around some of the work that we're doing with employers. We do have a kind of membership offer where we can work and dedicate time with any employer to think about these measures and really sort of understand priorities for your organisation. So feel free to contact us through our website or through my address there if you have any queries about that or any way we can help. And just thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was an excellent presentation. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Aaron Linton Smith, who's going to talk about his personal experience within the construction industry. Up until last year, Aaron led the CDM as a principal designer practice at Interserve Construction. Although Aaron held a senior management role, has a master's degree, is a fellow of the CIOB and the IOSH. Like many other autistic and dyslexic people of his generation, Aaron left school without any qualifications and has since had a bumpy career and reinventing himself on many occasions. Since receiving his autism diagnosis 9 years ago, Aaron's key objective has been to change the culture of autism and work and hold the door open for the next autistic generation so they too can thrive and grow. So let's hear from Aaron now.
Lee, thank you very much for kindly introducing me. You've almost gone through my first slide. I'm going to quickly take you through my journey of autism and work, identify the in-out cultural barrier that we face within work, and talk very briefly about communication across the autism and non-autism communication gap. And finally, I apologise if there are any pauses, as I have a severe form of dyslexia and sometimes I can't keep up with my notes. Can I have the next slide, please? Although professionally, I'm now at the top of my field of work, having run the construction design and management practice for Interserve, and being professionally recognised with a fellowship from the Chartered Institute of Building and as a Chartered Fellow of IOSH. My career as an autistic person has been typically difficult, bumpy and uncomfortable, and is best described as that of the Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen. Incidentally, there is a school of thought now that now thinks that Hans Christian Andersen was also autistic. Like many autistic people of my generation, I also left school without any worthwhile qualifications and entered the difficult world of work and employment, where I was frequently ignored, outcast, chastised, and persecuted for thinking differently and speaking differently. Typically, I've had a large number of different jobs, different careers, including working as a shipping clerk, qualifying as a nurse, working on the railway, before accidentally finding my way into construction. Now, as an autistic person, it's quite typical for us to be overlooked for promotion, to go through a large number of jobs, and to have our unfair number of redundancies, and we are frequently asked to leave work because we're not considered to be suitable for the organisation that we work with. It was 9 years ago that I received my autism diagnosis, and I was firmly advised by my family that under no circumstances was I to discuss or disclose my autism at work, as that would be the end of my career due to the stigma attached to autism. Then I was angry, annoyed, and fed up with trying to be the person I was not. So eventually I did disclose my autism, and suddenly I discovered that all the banter, eye-rolling, silent treatment, and being ignored in meetings suddenly stopped, and suddenly I was being respected for who I was, how I was, and I also became famous for identifying solutions to design problems way before the rest of the team were able to identify that there were any problems at all. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, in trying to make autism work, that organisations need to understand that history has never been kind to us, and why that is. Many organisations now wish to embrace diversity and inclusion. However, there's still a culture of banter and barriers which need to be challenged within most organisations. But unfortunately, political correctness has now become a silent barrier to making this work. What I'm basically saying is that you can't manage change unless you actually understand where the barriers are. Personally, since I've been diagnosed, I've discovered there are 3 groups of people that I come across in life. The first group are the ones that go out of their way to ignore you. The second group are ones who will accept you if you follow their strict set of rules and accept your place within that group. And then there's the third group of people who simply are happy to accept you for who you are, what you are, and how you are. And since being diagnosed, I've quickly discovered that life is too short to worry about the first 2 groups. I'm also currently looking for work again, and this is often a test which I apply to assessing whether an organisation is suitable or suitable for me. Could I have the next slide, please? if there's one reasonable adjustment that works for us best, and that is good communication. As Rosie Jones, the cerebral palsy comedian, has said, it's amazing how non-disabled people are at talking, how bad non-disabled people are at talking to disabled people, and how it's left to the disabled person to try and keep the conversation going. With us as autistic people, this barrier is probably worse. I don't understand body language. Comedy doesn't work on me, and I definitely need more time to assimilate questions that I'm being asked. Hence why it's useful for me to have job interview questions before the interview itself. I think the key message I want to put over in terms of this slide is that as autistic people, we are all very different. There's no typical autistic person. So trying to understand the condition is much, much easier if you understand us as individuals. If there's one slide that I want you to take away and use, it's this one. Can I have the next slide, please? Right. When I was first diagnosed, I couldn't find the famous autistic people who are openly autistic. And going down the route of becoming openly autistic was quite a challenge. However, it's amazing how things have changed in the last 9 years. So my objective now is to do whatever I can do to hold the door open for the next autistic generation when it comes to work. I believe that by getting to know us better, by communicating with us better, in time, this will help reduce the autism employment gap. It's a process of allowing autistic, non-autistic cultures to seep into society. However, based upon my experience of being severely dyslexic, it's going to take a long time, possibly 40 years, as is the case with me. Anyway, I'm looking forward to the future, and I'm looking forward to there being more diverse, neurodiverse group of people like myself within the workforce. Thank you very much.
That was fantastic, Aaron. Thank you so much for sharing your lived experience. That's so helpful. So we've got a second poll now for folk to spend the next 30 seconds kind of going through, and that is, which do you believe would build a more diverse construction workforce? So that'll be for about 30 seconds. So have a wee read through the options and pick which one you think would be best. There we go, some really interesting answers there. So now we're going to kind of dive into a bit of a panel kind of session with all of the all of those have given a presentation so far, and we'll be answering some questions. But any questions you've got, please do add them to the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them in our time that we've got left. I suppose the first question I want to throw out would be, how can you encourage your businesses to think differently when recruiting for more diverse talent? Would anyone like to take that one away first?
Yeah, okay, I'll jump in. I'm going to go back to that thing about thinking about the whys. If you can build a culture in your organisation where people understand why it's important to be inclusive, then you're more likely to actually get people to sort of take it on board. I think one of the things we've learned in our project is that sometimes the organisations can have really good policies at the top. They can have really sound kind of attitude to inclusion, but they don't always put resources and support in place for the different department heads or the line management. So it's really important to make sure that you support the people who are actually going to be supporting their employers directly and in understanding. And I think what Aaron said, I just want to kind of underpin that as well about the importance of communication. Communication isn't even just a two-way thing, it's kind of a circular thing, and it involves listening as well as communicating. Just to flag up, there was a really very small but perfectly formed piece of research came out of Edinburgh University a couple of years ago by Catherine Crompton, looking at communication between autistic people and non-autistic people. And what she found was that non-autistic people communicate with themselves, with each other, amongst themselves, quite effectively. Autistic people communicate with each other slightly more effectively. And the real difficulty is when autistic people and non-autistic people try to communicate with each other. That's where the challenge is. So I think that's it. I think that's all I've got to say, really, except if you can build a genuine culture of inclusion, again, what Aaron said, if you have a colleague who isn't able to, doesn't want to socialise, doesn't watch soaps and want to chat about them the next day, doesn't understand that it's okay to kind of let go a bit on a Friday afternoon because they're so rule bound and they've still got work to do, just leave them be and accept them for who they are, rather than feeling that there's something wrong with them because they're different than you. So I'll shut up now, let someone else get a chance.
I think you make a fantastic point, and one I would make is when you have those practices in place, from whether it's if someone even goes along for an interview, and even if they're unsuccessful, to going to a workplace where they're given opportunities, there's a fantastic culture. That word of mouth spreads among networks, among communities, among people themselves. A fantastic employer, one that tries, makes an effort, will advocate on their behalf as advisors. We'll hear from people that go, I've heard about this employer being a fantastic place to work. Do they have any opportunities? Whereas if we hear about a negative place, we're not likely to maybe put a fantastic client towards a job that even we might think it's good. So we're always got to think about that work environment and advocate for that for someone. What about for yourself, Aaron, for example? What would you encourage businesses to do to think differently when recruiting?
I've got a fantastically simple model, and this is based upon my experience at Interserve. Ironically, it was the young people, it was the apprentices that came to me because I seemed to have all the answers to how you could, the shortcuts to making things work. And I was able to explain how things worked. Quite complex things at work, technical things. And it's simply what I was quickly discovering is that young people understand diversity and inclusion, and what I find that the older people are within an organisation, the more senior they are, the bigger the barriers there are to it. And really, it's something that we ought to be turning to our younger people within our workforce and asking them how they can help us in terms of developing this culture.
I'll pose this question to you, Megan, with your background in supported employment, to kick this one off. What kind of effect has COVID had on the neurodiverse community and workplaces that you've been supporting people with?
Yeah, so I think it's very mixed. There's obviously a lot of people who have found this extremely difficult, and particularly if your job has been, turned upside down and you've had to adjust to working in a completely different environment at home, or even if you're still in person and you've got a completely new set of systems in place to deal with kind of COVID and the changes that are coming with that. So it's been a real challenge for some people, but we've similarly seen some of our clients who have been able to work at home and work in different scenarios and enjoy that, and actually feel, well, finally I'm kind of being catered for, and I'm being able to work in an environment which is good for me and which I'm more productive in. And it's helped us and it's helped employers to understand and see that things can be done differently and things can be done more effectively. So I think that's probably whilst it has been a very terrible time and a challenging time, that is a silver lining which has came from one side of the working argument, is that there's opportunity to do things differently that works for a more diverse range of people going forward. So it's just thinking about how can we build on that and make sure that we keep that as a focus and don't just let that slip away as we resume, as we sort of try to integrate face-to-face working again and that sort of thing. So quite a kind of split. It's very kind of person-centered experience again from what we've seen.
We've got time for one more question. I'm going to pose this to everyone. So for everyone that's kind of listening, what kind of small change, if you had to give one kind of bit of advice, what small change can we all make to be more inclusive in our own workplace? Aaron, do you want to kick off with a nugget?
Sorry, I haven't assimilated that question. I'll come back to it, can I?
Yeah, okay. Katrina, what kind of small change do you think we can make to be more inclusive in our own workplaces?
Well, I think, as I already said, it's about building a culture of genuine kind of acceptance of difference and understand that actually different people will bring different value to any team, any situation, and if we can take that on board, then we'll make a huge difference. The details, as Aaron kind of said, especially, well, everyone has said, it's individual and contextual, but the general kind of broad culture of an organisation is key, really. Just accept that people are different and they bring different things to the table.
What about for yourself, Megan? What would be the small change you would hope that we can make?
Sorry to just jump on the back of that, but that's absolutely, I think, a key message, is to just give acceptance for the fact that people are different. And, sometimes, particularly if you think about recruitment processes and interviews, we've built a certain etiquette of how that's supposed to go and what we expect from people going through interviews. So just trying to understand that it's okay to deviate from that and for people to behave differently or to go through those processes differently. So I think for me, again, that's the key message, is if we can just all try to accept that difference and see the real benefit of that actually as well.
What about for yourself, Aaron? What small change should we look to make in our workplaces?
Well, when you initially asked me the question, it's about communication, but it's also about the fact that organisations have got to change, but they've got to, this culture's got to change so they are flexible to change. At the moment, there's a lot of organisations, a lot of industries, a lot of professions, etc., which still carry a huge amount of heavy baggage, and the way they're structured, they're very inflexible to change. And I think for organisations to be successful in the future, they've got to be much more plastic to being able to change, and with resources to be able to put change in quickly. And I think it's also down to the fact that we need, the next generation, I think, are going to be much more plastic in terms of change, because society is changing so fast.
Well, thank you everyone for all those nuggets. Plenty of food for thought there. So we have our final poll now, and that is, what do you think should be a focus for our 12-month program? So we've got about 30 seconds for you to kind of have a wee read over that and to pick an answer. So plenty to choose from there. So yeah, so a lot of exciting kind of hopes for the next 12 months from everyone there. So that's our session today. So I would like to thank you, the audience, for taking the time to join us today, and for all your important questions. I'd also like to thank the panelists, Aaron, Katrina, and Megan, for sharing their presentations and valuable knowledge and insight and lived experience. I've learned a lot as well today. We really hope that you found this session useful. There have been a lot of questions submitted. Unfortunately, we've not been able to answer them all. However, CCIC will endeavour to answer them either within the next webinar or through follow-up communications. And your feedback is used to help future events and initiatives, so please do complete the feedback form when you receive after this event. Finally, please see the links in all the chat functions for related sites to stay up to date with the latest state of the art information, and you can contact each of the organisations through these links for further information or references if required, and be sure to follow us all on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. That just leaves me to say thank you for attending today, and we look forward to welcoming you at our next event. So have a good morning. Thank you.